Welcome to a new episode of TLDR, CISPA's first podcast series. TLDR is short for Too Long Didn't Read, and we named our podcast that way because we want to save you the hassle of reading long research papers. Once a month, we talk to our researchers and try to get them to explain their work in the way that even I, not being a cybersecurity researcher, can understand it. Speaking of me, my name is Tobias Ebelshäuser from CISPA's Communication Department, and I want to take the time to thank all of our listeners for regularly listening to our episodes, for giving us lots of feedback on how to improve our series, and for pitching new topics to talk about. This is episode 12, so it means it's been 1 year since we started doing this. Again, thanks to everyone who's listening, and I hope you stay with us for another year. Joining me today is Osman Ali Mian. Osman is a PhD student working at CISPA since 2019, and he already did his master's thesis here in Saarbrücken. He's originally from Pakistan and is doing research on causality in machine learning. I'm looking forward to talking to Osman all about that, as that is quite complicated, but very interesting and with possibly some very important uses in all fields of life. So, hi Osman, thanks for being here.
Hello Tobias, happy to be here.
So you're doing your PhD here at CISPA. Do you have any thoughts on CISPA's research environment for PhDs?
Yes, in short, I love it. I get to do things I like, thankfully. And at the same time, the avenues for collaborations are quite a lot. Depending if you see the diversity in the research groups and the areas that people work on, there's always one or the other way in which you can collaborate and actually make sure that your research is not just on paper, but it can also be ported to something more practical across various domains.
So you're working on causality in machine learning, and you already did your master thesis on that. Can you tell me a few things about what machine learning and what causality is?
Sure. So when it comes to machine learning, I would specifically tell you a bit about predictive or supervised machine learning, where you have a set of inputs or some data that represents some information about the world. Mm-hmm. So in this case, let's just go with an example. So let's assume you have some data about whether it's cloudy or not today, and you have some data about whether the grass in people's garden is it wet or not. Mm-hmm. And then you usually have some output that you're trying to predict, some response that you're trying to predict. In this case, this question would be, did it rain or not? And what machine learning would try to do is that it would assume you have access to lots and lots of data from the past or the one that you have collected, where there are certain levels of how cloudy it was, how wet the grass was, and then the answer whether it rained that day or not. Then the machine learning would try to do is take this input, try to find some set of rules, if you want to say those, and be able to somehow automate this process that the next time you see a certain level of cloudiness and a certain level of wetness in the gardens, then all you try to do is to figure out, did it actually rain or not on some instance that you had not seen before in your previous data. And the idea is that if you learn your rules right over the course of long future, you would be able to automate this whole thing without needing to reconsider a human presence saying that, oh, okay, I think maybe it rained, maybe it did not rain. This is the classical supervised machine learning. On the other hand, causality is a concept that takes a step ahead of this and says you don't just predict, you predict responsibly.
Okay, so what does predicting responsibly mean? So causality, as people use it in like real world when they talk about it, causality basically means we have something that caused another thing. So like we would say, okay, the clouds caused the grass to be wet. So doesn't the classical supervised machine learning also like map causality in a way?
It might and it might not. So by predict responsibly, you understood it absolutely correctly. So when people say causality, or the concept of causality is like saying that if one thing causes the other, simply means if I change something, then the effect would also experience that change, because that the change in the cause would cause some change to happen in what happens next.
Yeah.
Right. But it won't be the other way around. So for example, if I change some value of the outcome, there is no way what happened before it or what caused it would change. That's the notion. And the part where machine learning needs eventually the step of causality is that predicting based on everything could also mean that you find those patterns that are not causal. They are just correlations. Simple as that. And when they are correlations, these correlations may or may not exist in different places of the world. It's just that by chance, you found out that you live in a city where people don't have shades on their garden. So it turns out that whenever it rains, the garden always gets wet. In this case, a machine learning algorithm would find out that it's not just the amount of clouds that it needs to figure out if it rained or not. It also learns to look at the grass. And in this case, one of them, you could say it's causal, that, okay, clouds do cause rain in some sense, but the wet grass does not cause rain. It's simply, let's say, an effect of the rain or a byproduct. So as something that follows rain.
Yeah.
But by making the grass wet or not, you are not going to make the rain happen.
So if I go out and just water my garden, it won't mean I won't have rain.
Absolutely.
And so let's just take that example and say, okay, we have clouds, but not rain clouds. And so it's very hot out in the garden when the sun shines. And so everyone goes out to water their garden as soon as the clouds are out. So a machine learning model would still predict that the rain is a cause of the clouds, but it doesn't really have to be, because that would be an erroneous assumption.
That is true. So machine learning would not specify the wet garden to be the cause of the rain, but it would surely use it as a rule to find out if the rain happened or not. And this is where causality steps in. Causality says, okay, you need some kind of mechanism to differentiate these clouds from the wet grass. So as long as you are somehow able to figure out that, hey, it's not the wet grass that is giving me any information about the rain, it's actually the clouds.
Okay.
And if then I take only the clouds and learn the rules for rain using obviously any machine learning approach. So it's not like causality and machine learning are disjoint. So, but causality just says you need to be responsible in what you're predicting on. So then the causal part would somehow tell you that, hey, forget about the wet grass. Just think about this cloudy weather, and then use your machine learning algorithm only on this cloudy weather and use this to predict rain. Now, this means that if we go to now, for example, your city, where people always water the garden when it's cloudy, whether they water the garden or not would not matter, because the machine learning algorithm has only learned whether it rains or not using the clouds.
Okay. So, and would it also work with different types of causality? So let's just say I can also have clouds and not have rain. So could you add, like, say, humidity or other types of data that I'm not a meteorologist, so I don't know how far I can get with this.
No, but you're absolutely right. You're going in absolutely the right direction. So this is a simplified example where we only assumed that it's only the clouds that cause the rain. But yes, in real world example, let's say if we were working for some weather forecasting department, they would have huge number of features. Let's call them features: humidity, wind pressure, how far you're away from the sea, and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And including whether people have their gardens wet or not.
Yeah.
So, and then your idea is that if you have, let's say, hundreds of those or even tens of those, how do you find the ones that are actually causal? So the way you could see it is like, if you have the correct set of causal inputs to a machine learning algorithm, the rules that this machine learning algorithm would learn would correspond to the laws of nature.
Okay.
So if you given the causal rules on a very abstract sense, the patterns you learn have to follow the laws of the nature, because you have a cause, then you have a laws of nature that is encoded in that machine learning algorithm, and then the output that comes is whatever you are trying to predict. So in that sense, what causality would do is you find those particular causes, then the machine learning algorithm learns some rules, and those rules are universal. You could take them anywhere, and you could use them to find out what you want to find out.
So if I have a model that I built specifically with rules in mind for did it rain or not, I can just put in data from every city in the world, and I can also just put in a lot of data that this model would also not need, and it would just pick out the data it likes, or it says are like the laws of nature, and then it could predict reliably if there was rain or not.
Yeah, so it's a two-way process. The causal part, in the causal machine learning, the causal part would first try to find out the relevant parts.
Yeah.
And then it would only feed those relevant parts to the machine learning part. Okay. So the machine learning part, you can under reasonable setting assume that if the response from the causal part was correct, then the rules learned by the machine learning part would correspond to laws of nature. And then later on, you don't even have to collect all this data together. You collect all this much of data together. All you have to do is to collect only those relevant data together, and then use that relevant part of the data to make your prediction.
That makes sense. But if you stick to that example, in case of rain, a meteorologist would know what kind of variables to look at and to feed to a model that would be actually relevant in a causal sense. But if you don't really know what is causing in effect, like let's think of an example. Let's think of medicine. Like you have a set of genes, or you have a set of inputs, like how people live, what they eat, if they smoke or not. And here, I think it could be much harder to actually predict a certain disease or something, or a certain kind of, weight gain, whatever, like a certain kind of effect. And how do you figure out in that case what causes actually are?
That is a very interesting question. And just to first step back on the weather example, for the time being, I was assuming that the meteorologists are, in this hypothetical scenario, no offense, they were dumb. So they did not know what are the correlations. Okay. And let's say the meteorologist in turn was also using wet grass to predict whether it rained or not. Yeah. So in that case, this causal layer would have told them that, hey, wait a minute, stop using this and use only these instead. So, and then when you think about this transports easily, not just to this particular example, but also to medical example, perhaps financial examples, where you have the data among which you do not know what exactly is the cause of what. And this is exactly where these causal discovery algorithms, some of which that I work on, come in.
So your model tells you what the causes are for certain effects.
Exactly. So you develop such algorithms such that you give them. So in that sense, this is both a setting where you know what you want, what you are predicting, but at the same time, you don't know the bigger picture. So in that sense, if you have, let's say let's say not that big, but let's say some 10 different features, and it could be, or let's just say even 3 different features. So how cloudy it is, whether it rained or not, and whether or not the grass is wet. So in this case, a reasonable person could say that it's the clouds that cause the rain, and it's the rain that causes the grass to be wet. And let's just add whether you watered your lawn or not as the fourth thing. So it's like then rain and watering your lawn causes your grass to be wet. So what you have, if you could imagine such a structure, it's called a graph or a causal graph. This tells you the causal dependencies that exist. So an arrow or a path from the clouds to the rain tells you that it's the clouds that are responsible for causing rain.
Yeah.
And then the direction of arrows or the path from the water hose to the rain to the wet garden tells you that these two factors are responsible for the wet grass. And then so later on, if you want to predict how wet the grass is, you only have to look at whether it rained or not and whether you watered your garden or not. So yes, so the algorithms that I particularly work on in Causality exactly aim to do this. You give it a large data set, and all it tries to do is try to come up with these set of dependencies and a network or a set of causal rules per se that tell you, okay, this one, if you want to predict this one, then these are the causes for this. If you want to predict this one, the causes for these are this, and so on.
Okay. So I think the thing I'm trying to wrap my head around right now is, how does the model find that out? Like if I give it a huge set of data from all kinds of different cities around the world with all these features, like whether are clouds, did people water their garden, did it rain, and was the grass wet? Like how, and I feed all that into that algorithm. How does that algorithm tell me what is the cause of what?
Exactly. This is where the whole magic of causality comes in. There are a number of ways to do that. I'll briefly tell you what in general people do, which is either you could initially start by assuming everything is cause of everything.
Okay.
And then let's say, and again, I say this because I explain this in abstractness, is that let's say you have some wise man or an oracle that you could just go to and say, and simply ask a yes/no question. And that could be, hey, is this related to this? And the guy would tell you, or the lady would tell you yes or no.
Okay.
And the moment they say no, you kind of remove that causal connection. And then you keep doing this for each of the pairs of all the things you have. And for every answer that you get no, you just cut it out. And eventually you are left with some sort of pruned network of.
Yeah.
And then there are some technical rules that you could use to so to further find out what is the direction of those particular causations. And eventually you have what is a causal network. So in essence, you start with everything connected and you keep slashing things until you end up with, until you cannot slash things anymore. And whatever that is left, you assume, okay, so these are my causal connections. That's one way. So, but the catch here is the part I've not explained here is that wise person who tells you. Yeah, so in technical terms, this is just what we call in an independence test. So independence test, all it does is that you give it values of two variables combined together, and it tries to find out whether they are related or not. If they are related, it will say yes. If they're not related, it would simply say no. When it says no, you do not consider those together anymore. That's one way. The other way is the opposite. You start by assuming nothing is connected. Everything is independent. Nothing causes the other. And then you again have a wise person. And this time this wise person tells you, the question you could ask this wise person is, hey, if I assume that this thing causes this, is it helpful? And then wise person gives you a score, let's say from 1 to 100. If it says 100, it says, yeah, very useful. Yeah. And if it says 0 or 10, it's like, nah, you could use this, but it's not really causal. So, and then you, one step at a time, you keep asking these questions. And if you ask these questions right, eventually you only have those connections that would have the highest causal score. And then again, you start with an empty network and then you end up building the full thing.
So, but the magic kind of happens in that independence test.
In the first case, the independence test, and the second case, the wise person is what is called a score.
Okay.
So the score, as the wiser the score is, the better it will tell you whether this particular causal connection is highly valuable or not.
I assume this will get very technical very quick, but how do you build an independence test or a score that actually makes sense? Is it just trial and error? Do you just try everything out and see where it ends up? Or?
No, not exactly. So there are simple probability rules. So depending on how you have built or the assumptions that you require to construct the causal network. So I will try not to make this technical. So just think of it in abstract sense. Let's say I find out that it rained.
Yeah.
Once I know it rained, does it tell me anything about whether the grass would be wet or not? It does.
Yeah.
Right? It does. So in this case, if somehow this wise person could see this whole thing and see, hey, every time it rains, I get to see a certain information, or I can reliably say how wet the grass would be. Well, then there's certainly a relation. So I would always say, are they related? I would answer yes. Mm-hmm. Right? This is the notion of independence. Does knowing one thing tell me or improves my understanding of something else? If the answer is yes, then perhaps there is some connection. On the other hand, let's just say we have this along with these cloudiness and whatnot, whether majority of the people wore a white shirt or not.
Yeah.
But the number of people who wear white shirt, if I look at it and I look at how wet my grass is, chances are that knowing how many people wore white shirt would tell me nothing about how wet my grass is.
Yeah.
So in this case, the wise person would somehow find a way to identify that, hey, knowing this is telling me nothing about that, and knowing that is telling me nothing about that, the previous thing. So then it would say no.
Yeah.
So, and this you construct, the entire thing you construct mathematically, and then in terms of probabilities, and then if you see the probability of the second thing does not change once you find out what the first thing is, implies that the first thing is not telling you anything about the second thing. So you say no, and then you cut that causal connection down.
Okay.
That's how it works in without getting too technical.
Yeah, but I think right now this example with grass and rain, I think that's very simple, because even us humans can wrap our head around that. Okay, sure, it doesn't really make a difference if someone is wearing a white shirt or not when I consider how wet my grass is. But if we get back to medical data, like let's say we have let's say in Germany, a lot of people drink coffee, and there's like a certain type of thing that is in coffee that could cause cancer or something. It's just no offense to coffee, I really love it. It's just for the sake of an example. So let's say it's very tough to kind of assume that thing is going to cause cancer. So how would you program that model, or how would you do these assumptions, or like tell the wise person what the probability is for a thing you might not even think about because it's like hidden somewhere?
Right. So the first rule of talking to a wise person is you don't tell anything to the wise person.
Okay.
Jokes aside, but the point is the wise person is supposed to is supposed to have that knowledge about the world.
Okay.
That divine knowledge, if you want to call it. Now, but in reality, obviously, you do not. If the wise person if we had such a wise person, I think a lot of problems would be solved. but in reality, the wise person is some mathematical construct that you build into your causal model, and that could come with a lot of assumptions. And if those assumptions are true, then it does not need to know whether this means a person is wearing white shirt and whether this means wet grass. All it's going to do is look at the values of what the values are. Now it does not care whether this value is of a gene, whether this value is from some component of a coffee, and it would not care whether the value on the other side is the value of wetness of the grass. It just doesn't care about what the heading of the value is. All it cares about what the actual values are. And the question it asks is, again, the question that it simply asks is that based on what my assumptions are or what my divine knowledge is, can I say anything about the second thing once I know the first thing?
Yeah.
And then suddenly the question of whether it's about white shirts, whether it's about coffee, whether it's about some medicine, it's out of the window, because you're not looking at the title of what the column says or what the feature says. You're only looking at the values. And then you see if, values here, do they tell me something about values over there? If they do not, so then all you simply say is that, there is no connection.
So the upside to that thing is basically all you need is data.
All you need is data. Exactly.
So you just have if we stick to if we go to medicine or somewhere, all you need is like a very large pool of patients and their genes or what they eat and everything, and you just throw it in there. And if your wise person is programmed well enough,
exactly. Cool. Yes, that's exactly. All you need is data. I mean, that that's the mantra of every machine learning or supervised learning person. Yes, all you need is data and perhaps some chocolate. But anyways, yes. So this is exactly how it works. You are not so concerned about. I mean, of course, you could, in this wise person, you could take some expert knowledge and add this in addition, such that eventually you already tell it that, hey, this and this are not connected. So the wise person, no matter what your data says, every time you ask this wise person whether these are connected, it would tell you no. So this is the part where I retract, where I told you that you don't tell anything to the wise person. You could, but in reality, you don't have to. You don't need to. But if you want, you could.
Okay, so if I understand that correctly, your job or your research right now is how do I build a wise person?
Yes, but not in the independent sense. I work more on the score side, which means I start with nothing. And I progressively ask the wise person, instead of a yes or no answer, I ask them a more, let's say, a more of a continuous answer. So let's say a score between 0 and 100. So it tells me not just a yes or a no. It tells me that, hey, if I ask them, are these two causally related? And if they say 10 out of 10, okay, then I can be more or less sure that this causal connection does exist. Otherwise, I'm not so sure. And then there have to be certain decisions that let you decide, okay, beneath this surety, I will not consider this, or I will consider this, but I would be very skeptical.
Yeah.
So then my work is mostly on building this wise person in a score-based setting.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so if you have built this wise person, it doesn't matter what kind of data you feed it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So this sounds like a very, very powerful tool. So if you have it, you can basically predict if someone will get cancer, or if my house will be worth a lot more in the future. Does that make sense?
That is absolutely correct. So there are a number of assumptions that we are, let's say, sweeping under the rug now, if you want to say that. But yes, in an ideal world, what you're looking at is if you have the correct causes, and then a machine learning algorithm is able to learn the rules of nature, essentially what you have is a simulation time machine. You could think of any scenario, and those rules of nature would cascade that scenario all the way down into the future, or however which you call it. And then you can, yes, obviously think of scenarios, think of alternate prediction. It's actually like, have you seen Minority Report?
Yeah, sure.
It's a Minority Report. They used to somehow were able to see crimes happening beforehand.
Yeah.
And then arrest someone before
in 15 minutes, the crime will happen and you can arrest them now. And it was like ethical discussion. Can you arrest someone before they actually did it?
Exactly. Now, but if you look at it from a causal lens, if you have a perfect causal system where you have measured everything that is important for crime to be measured, and you have your causal relationships right, and then the machine learning algorithm has learned all the laws of nature, 15 minutes from now, you could propagate this whole thing and see, hey, 15 minutes later, there is a high chance that this person is over here killing this one. And in sense, you have simulated what this person is going to do. And so in that sense, it's like hypothetically speaking, you could easily have a system that does the Minority Report for you.
So, but we're very far away from that.
Of course. So there is in theory, and then there is in practice. And in practice in theory is what we envision. And in practice is what we are trying to achieve.
But where are you right now in practice? Like, is there a way to, let's say, if you have a reasonable amount of medical data, can you predict a certain type of disease with your models, or is that something that is like 20 years away?
If this is about just one type of disease, then there is still a chance that we can. Under obviously a lot of assumptions, but the one that I think is worth mentioning, at least here, is that we always assume that we have measured everything that is relevant. So if we go back to our very simple example that cloud causes rain, then our assumption is that if we have seen clouds, wet garden and rain, then only the rain or only the wet garden and the clouds, or one of them, could cause rain. It could not be something outside, something that we have not seen. And that is called a sufficiency assumption, which means that you know all that you need to know. Only then can you say that, okay, if this is all that is need to know, then these are the causes. Because it could be that if you know some things, for example, you mentioned humidity. I've never measured humidity.
Yeah.
But if in this case, if I were to just build some rain predictor based on clouds alone, it would not exactly be causally correct. So, and there's no way for me to check if everything was measured or not. So that's one of the main assumptions that is there. And it can be in some different cases limiting. So, but let's just say there are scenarios where you could have, where this assumption would hold.
Yeah.
And in such scenarios, there you have the guarantee that if you get infinitely many amount of data, you would be able to predict everything right. Yes.
So but you mentioned like this sufficiency, this what should you call it?
It's a sufficiency assumption.
A sufficiency assumption. So you said that you have to assume that you've looked at everything that is relevant, but I don't know, in case of disease or even I don't know, even like financial markets, there could be like some, or as they call it, I think, black swan event, that there's like something you could not possibly predict that comes from somewhere. So these are out of the picture then, right? So if something like totally weird happens, or if, I don't know, if like in 10 years it turns out that some things we use in our shampoo causes a certain type of cancer, your model will not be able to predict that because it has never heard of it.
Exactly. So again, okay, that's a very intelligent question. So on top of this, then alongside sufficiency, what you need to assume when making use of these, and this is not just causality, this is also machine learning. So even if you put causality out of context, you need this for machine learning, is that you observe the entire spectrum of things that could happen.
Yeah.
So, and as long as you have that, only then could you get the whole picture or learn the correct set of rules. So this is kind of a very interesting story that I was told as a child. It's quite common back in my country. It is as if you have like 5 or 6 people who have blindfold on their eyes and they've never seen an elephant. And you ask them to go and see how elephant looks like. So one of them ends up touching the elephant on the trunk. The other one gets hold of the ear. One of them gets the tail. So all of them would describe the elephant, but they would describe totally different things because they're blindfolded and all they've had was that particular picture. But the moment you have this blindfold off and you look at the whole picture, only then can you reliably describe an elephant. And this is, so in this setting, obviously, if something strange happens with your data, sure, then you have a problem. But that is not the problem that happens because of the algorithm as such. It's just that the assumption your algorithm was using was that it has observed the entire spectrum of events. And when it hasn't, something that happens outside the learned rules, obviously there is no guarantee that it would consistently predict something that is exactly how it should happen.
Okay, so if we say, let's use cancer because I think that's I think a lot of research goes into like figuring out what causes cancer and how to stop cancer from even building up. So if we use that, we can say, okay, I have observed smoking, I have observed eating certain foods, I have observed work conditions, and if I have these 3, I can say what kinds in this model causes cancer and whatnot, but I can't, like, even then I can't rule out that a person will get cancer from another thing that's out of my model.
Exactly. You could say that. However, there is a branch of causality, which I'm not actively working on, but it would tell you, instead of drawing, let's say you have yellow teeth and let's say you have cancer, a label that tells you whether you have cancer or not. And let's say there is a cause for yellow teeth and cancer that you have not observed. Then there are certain algorithms that would, instead of giving you a single arrow from one to the other, they would give you a bidirectional arrow. And which means the bidirectional arrow simply tells you that there could be a common cause for both of them that you do not have in your data set.
Okay.
So then it comes down to the trade-off between expressibility and the exactness. So if you have bi-directed arrow between everything, it's like there is something that causes all of it.
Yeah.
And then, so sure, it's a bit more accurate in terms of your understanding, but how useful it is.
So it says life causes death, basically.
Exactly. Or let's say yes, exactly. So growing old and death, and there is something that causes both of them. Okay, sure. Yeah. So go for it. But if you in some sense, and I'm not saying that this could be entirely correct, but if you say age is a cause of death in some sense, it's perhaps not completely true, but it is not completely false either, because if you only go by natural deaths and look at a certain trend, you see, if I could somehow magically change your age to 100 or 120, I mean, the chances that I don't find you alive the next day are quite high, but and vice versa. So then it comes down to, basically, you could still have this sufficiency assumption and have a representation that tells you something, But then the question only becomes how useful versus how reasonable. So it's a different kind of trade-off. But yes, so the sufficiency assumption is one of the assumptions that I use in my work.
Okay. So it basically tells you, like you said, something can be very exact, but it can be not useful at all, because every time I try to use the model, it says I need more data, or it says, okay, it could be everything. So I have no idea. I'm just have a model that tells me the same that I knew before that I don't know.
Exactly.
Okay. So,
but to be exact, you need assumptions, and so those exactness are a result of your assumptions. And suppose if you make an assumption that is wrong, then those exact results would also be wrong. So that's where you have to find that kind of trade-off between the assumptions that you make and the results that you report.
Is that something you're working on?
Yes, exactly. So my primary work when I started doing causality was to consider some of these assumptions, and some of them are quite stringent, if you ask me, and to be able to make sure that I could make as many of them as I could as reasonable as possible. So for example, not the causal sufficiency assumption, but let's just say there is an assumption that requires all of your data to be at a single place, a single long table with lots and lots of data. Mm-hmm. But that's not practical, because let's say hospitals, for example, they're never going to share your data, be it because of privacy concerns, ethics, or laws that prevent them from doing so. So in that sense, you have a lot of data if you combine everything together, but you do not have enough data at each hospital. And then the question is, can you still do this causal part on using all of this? So that is one of the assumptions that, for example, I've tried to relax. Then there is a case, for example, where it says that there is a notion of what is called intervention. And intervention is something that you have a law of nature, but you make some changes that this law of nature no longer affects something. So in this case, it could be that I cover my garden. So whenever it rains, my garden always stays dry. So this is kind of an intervention on my garden. So, but in real world data, when you have, let's say, genes and whatever not, you could do some medical interventions. So you could change some things in the gene, but you could do this while knowing it. But at the same time, things could happen without you knowing it. So in some of the cases, you would have some data where the actual laws of nature hold, and you would have some of the data where things have been meddled with. But that does not mean the actual law of nature has changed.
Yeah.
So if you have many such datas, a common approach nowadays would just try to stack them together and try to learn that one thing. But there would be mixed signals, because in some of them this would exist, some of them it would not exist because of the intervention, and then the method would get confused.
So an intervention would be like giving a certain type of medicine.
Yes, and then this means that this medicine raises your blood pressure. So it's like indirectly you are intervening on blood pressure. It's not a normal blood pressure anymore, right? So so that being said, let's say you have a lot of data and you do not. There are cases where you intervened, but it could be that the machine recording your stuff was a bit broken, so there was an intervention in the recording, and you do not know that.
Okay.
So, and if you have such data, then you would like to find out not what just the correct causal connections are, but you would also want to know, was there any data where there was an anomaly? So where something was against what every other thing says. So finding those out is also a challenging task.
Yeah.
That is something that also I'm trying to do. And many other things, but these are, let's say, the highlights.
Okay. And what kind of data are you working with, or with what kind of data have you worked before?
Essentially, it could be any data.
Yeah.
But right now, I've mostly been working with cancer data of different sorts. So one of them is lung cancer gene expression and so on. So there are different variants of cancer that I've been investigating lately.
Okay, so how was this data shared with you? How does that work?
This is part of a joint collaboration between, if I remember the name in English correctly, German Cancer Research Foundation, and CISPA. It's a joint project, and where we are trying to actually develop these federated. By federated, I mean that you cannot collect all the data together. It's at different hospitals.
Yeah.
You are trying to find such solutions, causal solutions that can work in a federated setting and can handle, let's say, unknown interventions of sorts.
So the end goal of that project would be to have a model that can reliably tell you where to intervene to stop the cancer from growing.
If everything works the best, yes.
Okay.
And then I think that would be something worthwhile. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that really sounds like something that could like literally change the world if we have these models and if they're reliable enough. As you said, you could also attach them to all kinds of data. So if we could predict housing prices, we could predict, I don't know, whatever you could think of probably, right?
That is correct, yes. Under the right assumptions, under the right modeling assumptions, you can in theory simulate all sorts of possibilities, yes.
So you're basically building, in case of medicine, you basically building a patient with which you can experiment.
Yes, without consequences.
Okay.
Yes, a patient on which you could experiment without having any consequences. Yes.
And then if you like do the wrong thing, you can just undo it and go back and do it again.
Yes. Make them alive again.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds like something I think a lot of doctors and people working in medicine would love to have.
I think it's there in some sense or the other. I'm not saying that I'm championing causality. I would be the first one to do it. It's just that the causality is adding that layer of reliability / responsibility to it, such that it is less often that you see those unusual situations that, hey, what just happened? Remember we discussed a while ago that, that there could be some strange things that are happening just because we have not seen a certain scenario.
Yeah.
But when you have just the causes, you're already reducing possible scenarios, because the fewer possibilities you have, the fewer number of overall scenarios are that you can get. You're already reducing them. And then the chance that the laws of nature or the rules that change over these is actually much less than if you use anything to train your model.
Yeah.
So in that sense, what the contribution of causality is that it's making this whole thing reliable or robust, if you want to put it this way.
So it's probably never going to be perfect, but it's going to be a whole lot better than
baby steps. Yes.
usual machine learning.
Exactly.
Okay, that sounds very, very interesting. And I think if done correctly and if your research will be successful, which I'm sure it will, so this research in general, like the field of causality and machine learning, especially when it comes to medicine, might actually change a lot of things for the better.
That is true. And I hope so too.
Okay, Osman, I still have 5 quick questions for you at the end. Are you ready?
Sure. Is it like a rapid fire?
Kind of. I don't know.
Okay.
You can take your time.
Okay.
So the first one is, do you use a password manager? If yes, why? And if no, why not?
No, I don't. I guess my passwords are all in my brain. So I tend to, without giving too much away, I tend to have a separate password for everything. And it's usually a very long phrase that reminds me of that particular thing I have an account on. So it's a very long sentence affiliated with each of the accounts. And that's how I guess I am able to remember them.
And it sounds like you have a very good memory.
I mean, if you affiliate your phrase, let's say, with something that is known, then it's obvious. So for example, the quick brown fox jumps over a lazy dog.
Sure.
Every time you look at a dog and you think of this, then it's usually it's not that much effort remembering it. And then there is a certain combination of a specific password that I just jumble around for accounts that don't really matter, the ones that don't have my personal information.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. Have you ever fallen for a phishing email yourself?
Ooh, that's embarrassing.
So I'm noticing an answer coming. So
Yes. Embarrassingly so once. And it was like 4 months ago.
So quite recent.
Yes, quite recent. And I mean, embarrassingly so, because you're working here in research in cybersecurity, and like of all the times in your life, the only time you fall victim to a phishing scam is while working here. But anyways, it had to do with I was TAing one of the courses here at the university.
Yeah.
And the email was disguised as one of the organizational emails, which is actually pretty impressive for someone to have so much social engineering skills too.
Yeah, sure. So it wasn't not a very broad thing like, here you've won a lot of money.
No, it was no African prince. No.
Yeah, okay.
So Nigerian prince, I guess. Yeah. That's how they call it, right?
Yeah, the Nigerian prince scam,
yes. Yeah. So no. It was the email, all that the email said was that because I was the head TA, I was managing an email account for an email mailing list for all of the students. And the email said that there is some request pending for one of the students. So it turns out, so basically we had a filter there, so the students could not directly message, they had to be moderated. So this looked like a moderation email, so that I had to go and confirm the moderation. So, and the language was a bit, let's say, it did tickle a bit that, okay, something is not right. So I did open the link. Yeah. I did look at the URL, and the URL was actually very well disguised, because so normally when I check for phishing scams, I would check the URL. Yeah. And the start part of the URL was actually quite exactly the same as it's just that what follows after dot, if I bothered to read it, I would have known that this is not. But then obviously I did not notice that, and I ended up giving them my account credentials for the university account, and immediately when the page refreshed, I figured out, okay, wait, this is not how it's supposed to function. And then I realized I had been scammed. So, but the good part was there wasn't any damage done as such. I immediately changed my password. I notified the system administrator, and they were able to see that, okay, here's something going on, and they were able to shut it out. So thankfully no damage done, but
so I
embarrassing.
I think it was like a kind of a warning shot to you.
Yes.
You've learned to really check the URL.
I just delete these emails now.
Yeah. I don't care.
Because I think whoever did their homework had their homework outdated, because like a couple of months later, I get a similar email, except that I'm no longer a TA and I don't have access anymore.
Okay.
So when you look at the email, you realize, okay, this has to be scam.
So, but the question I think is very interesting. Who is doing that? Is that a student who's trying to access some?
I have no idea what one could potentially gain from getting access to a mailing list, but it's certainly worth questioning.
Maybe they were trying to cancel the TA employment.
Or maybe, I don't know. I mean, you could, and this is just hypothetical, it could be a third person with the motives that once you have access to the mailing list, you could send malicious links to a wider audience.
Sure.
And
that also makes sense.
Scam all of them. So something like that.
Okay, so I'm glad nothing bad happened to you.
Yeah, I'm glad too. I am glad too. Trust me.
So, third question: as a cybersecurity researcher, is there something different, like when it comes to handling your data? Are you like very careful on what you're sharing on the internet or so?
In general, yes. But I think this is irrespective of whether I were a cybersecurity researcher or not. So I do tend to avoid putting in my personal pictures. So I do put them. It's not like it's completely null, but I do, but very sparingly. Okay. It's just that I'm a bit skeptical of having such public internet presence that you share your entire life.
Sure.
So I do have a Twitter account for research, sharing my research. So there, even it's mostly work related tweets and stuff, not personal stuff as such.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless it's cricket.
It's cricket?
It's cricket. Unless it's cricket, you would find a lot of personal stuff. Because it's kind of a sport that you have in Pakistan. Yeah. Everyone loves it a lot. And in a few days, you have the Asia Cup, which is like all the teams in Asia playing for a trophy.
Who's going to win?
Let's just record 3 different versions of it, and then you release the one that is correct.
Okay.
Okay, then I'd say Pakistan.
Yeah.
Easy.
Okay. Fingers crossed. Okay, very nice. Do you have a smart home? Or do you like smart home appliances?
In that sense, I'm quite conventional. I don't mind switching on the fan instead of, I don't know, like having a hugely complicated infrastructure. I don't know. I just like my conventional style better. That's just a matter of taste, you could say.
Okay. For the last question, I'm sorry. So last question, how do you feel about cryptocurrencies, and have you ever invested personally? If you're comfortable sharing that, of course.
I don't know much, to be honest. So I've heard, there's always these buzzwords going around cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum for that sake. But I really have no clue how they work.
Okay.
I have once or twice have stumbled upon people telling how they work, but no, not as such.
So crypto is like very far away from your field of research.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's say I've not been so interested in this.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
just simply put. So and I've not really had the motivation to dig deep into it.
Sure. The more you do dive into your own research, the faster you'll be.
Yes.
Changing the world.
Yep.
Okay, Osman, thank you very much for taking the time to be here. I thought it was very interesting, and I hope you will continue with your research successfully. And maybe one day you will be able to predict lots of things.
Thank you so much, and I loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
Goodbye, and see you next time.
Goodbye.